Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is understand. Let's take a moment and review some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first definition for the verb understand is to perceive or grasp the intended meaning of words. This is a verb that gets used a lot when I'm teaching classes. So I might have students say, Katie, I don't understand that word. And many times they'll spell it to me or they'll point if we're in person. So I don't perceive or grasp here, again, is more of a mental grasping or getting of the meaning. Another way, and it's kind of connected here, to use understand means to perceive the significance, the explanation, or the cause of something. Again, this is another definition and usage that I hear often from students. So sometimes we discuss grammar rules, and it's not uncommon for someone to say, I don't understand the explanation. I don't understand why we're doing it this way or why the words must go in this particular order, for example. A third way to use the verb understand is means to interpret or view something in a particular way. With this definition, many times it has this gets used in a way where one person interprets or views something one way and someone else a different way, right? And there can be a conflict or another word that we might discuss a little bit later in the video. A fourth way to use the verb understand means to infer something from information received. This is something that many people do as they read or as they have conversations. They hear one piece of information, a second piece of information, and then they make this jump to a conclusion. So they might say, I understood that this would happen because these first two things happened. Okay. A fifth way understand gets used can mean to assume something to be the case. And related to that is to take something for granted. So again, assume means you think someone else is going to do something, maybe that they perceive or understand something as well. But again, many times there's a disconnect. A sixth way to use understand means to be knowledgeably aware of the character or nature of something. So I hope you can see how all six of these definitions have some connections to each other. So this verb is really something we do in our heads. It's not something we can see, but it's about getting information, perceiving, inferring, being aware, right? All of those things are rather connected. For now, you should know that understand is an irregular verb. To make the progressive form of the verb, all you need to do is add ing, and that forms understanding. The past tense and participle forms of the verb are the ones that require a spelling change. So instead of having stand as our ending, we're going to change the a and the n to two O's. And we pronounce that word understood. Understood. Okay. Now, you might be relieved to know we don't have any phrasal verbs that we need to study or discuss today. So instead, we're going to make some sample sentences. Today, I thought it would be good to review the simple past tense and the simple future. Let's start with the simple past tense. We use this verb tense to talk about completed actions that occurred at a known point in the past. Sometimes there are time signals in these sentences. This could be a word like yesterday. It could be a specific time or date in the past. Might hear ago used. So an hour ago, 2 weeks ago, 10 years ago, right? All of those things are signaling the past tense. But not every sentence in the simple past tense is going to have a time signal. So it can be implied as part of a longer passage, as part of a conversation. We don't have, if we're talking about yesterday, we don't have to keep repeating that word for people to understand we're talking about completed actions. The nice thing about making sentences in the simple past tense is that our pattern or our structure stays the same no matter what our subject is. So in the positive or the affirmative, I'm going to have my subject, and then I'm going to have that irregular form of the verb. Let's take a look at an example sentence. Eventually, I understood the problem. Okay, so again, this might come from a longer part of a conversation, but we're talking about many times understanding the cause, understanding the issue here that is maybe creating some kind of difficulty. Okay. Now, if I want to make a negative sentence in the simple past tense, I'm going to start with my subject. Next, I'm going to use did not, and then the base verb. So I'm not using the irregular form when I make a negative sentence. Here's another example. She didn't understand that she was breaking the law. Okay? So this would mean like violating, doing something illegal, right? Here we're saying maybe she wasn't aware. Okay. Now, usually that is not a defense for doing it, right? But notice there, did not is being used in the contraction form, didn't. That's fine. Very common to hear that as people speak. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the simple past tense. To do this, I start with did, then I have my subject, and then the base verb. Again, with my yes or no question, I'm not using the irregular form. Here's another example. Did he understand the importance of this assignment? Right? That might go back to the second definition of our verb. So understanding the significance. Now let's move on and talk a little bit about the simple future. Today we're going to focus on using will. There are a few different ways to talk about the future. Will is one of them, and it's very common as people make predictions, kind of guesses about what they think will happen in the future. They use it with promises and offers. Then you might see people use it or hear people use it with their plans as well. This is another verb tense where our pattern stays the same no matter what our subject is. Okay? So we will begin our affirmative sentences with the subject. We'll use will and then the base verb. Let's take a look at an example. No one will understand what they've been going through. Okay, so sometimes we might think of this as sort of appreciating how challenging something might be. And I know that's a feeling many people have through different struggles, like people are not going to maybe be aware or have the experience, notice the or perceive that importance or significance of something. Now, let's talk about making negative sentences in the simple future. To do this, we start with our subject, we use will not, and then the base verb. Now, will not can also be combined into a contraction, and that contraction is won't, long O there, okay, W-O-N apostrophe T. I've used that in my example here. Students won't understand your directions. Sometimes I've heard this actually from my spouse. I will share like, I've got this idea for an activity. I'm going to do this, and he can be really good to say like, oh, Katie, that's really complex, or that might be a problem. So this would be an example where maybe he's telling me, he's making a prediction. Students won't understand what you're asking them to do. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the simple future. To do this, start with will, then you'll have your subject, and then the base verb. Here's my last example. Will she understand your note? Okay, so this could be an issue with handwriting. Maybe it's too short or there are abbreviations. But someone here might be concerned that another person is going to be able to grasp the meaning of that particular written note. Now, let's move on and talk about some words that are related to our verb understand. The first word we're going to discuss is the noun understandability. This is the quality of being comprehensible or having the ability to be understood. An example of this in a sentence: new legislation aims to improve the understandability of food labels, right? And I think specifically this was talking about nutrition. Many people look at it, they see certain numbers and like, I don't know if this is good or bad. And so there is some different federal legislation here in the United States that's looking at changing how some of that information is presented and communicated to others. Another related word you might encounter is the adjective understandable. This can have a couple different meanings. We could be referring to the or describing something that is able to be understood, right? So sometimes teachers might check in as you've read something and say, was the story understandable, right? Could you grasp the meaning, right? But another way to use that adjective understandable is really similar to reasonable. Right? You're describing something that is expected. So an example of this, and it's a true example from the last few months, it's understandable you would miss class because your wife is having a baby. So I had a student who was so apologetic that he was going to have to miss class. And when he explained why, I was like, oh, that is reasonable. It is more important to be in the hospital and be supporting your wife and being there for that huge life moment, right? That is reasonable or understandable. Another related word is the adverb understandably. This connects back to that second definition of the adjective. So we're describing an action here that's reasonable or expected, or we're describing another adjective. And that's what's happening here in my example sentence. They were understandably exhausted after working past midnight, right? So we're saying, oh, that makes sense, right? One last related word for us today, and it's actually another verb. I've added the prefix miss, M-I-S, to our base verb here. And many times when you see that M-I-S, you can think something is incorrect. We have some kind of problem, something has usually a negative meaning to it. So if we misunderstand, then we fail to interpret or understand something correctly, right? We're not grasping the meaning. We're not reaching sort of the same conclusions. So, an example of this: I misunderstood your message. My apologies. Right? So here, I hope you notice the irregular form, understood, right, that we talked about earlier today, it continues with this other form of the verb. So misunderstand is also an irregular verb. Well, I hope today's video was understandable, but if you have any questions anytime you're watching these videos, please leave a comment. I'll do my best to respond. Thank you all so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.